So just out of curiosity, it sounds to me like, I mean, it makes perfect sense to me, but it's also one of those things where it sounds like it's like building muscle strength. You have to practice it. You have to be able to recognize that the moment's arrived, and then you have to practice that whole questioning the moment or the what's happening, and then you have to practice the thanks but no thanks. That's part of the whole thing. So how is there like a known period of time that it takes to develop a new habit? Is it developing a new habit? How long does it take to develop mastery in that?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, the other thing I'll say just before I get onto that is that one of the more difficult parts, I think, of any change, but particularly this kind of psychological change, is that when you first start to create or recognize those choice moments and do something different, just the fact that you're doing something different and you're going out on a limb and you're taking a bit of a risk feels really weird and uncomfortable and new. And that can then, in fact, create anxiety in and of itself. And sometimes people don't quite recognize that it is good anxiety, if you like. It's risk-taking anxiety. It's good. You're doing something different. That's a great thing. And if people aren't prepared and don't recognize that, then they think, oh, the anxiety's coming back. I shouldn't change. I'll just go back to doing it the old way. Yeah, so there's a really important step there in kind of realizing that it's really normal to have anxiety in the change. As much as you're getting anxiety from the old way, there's this kind of really strange, initial period where even though you're doing the right thing, it's still not going to kind of feel better yet. It'll just feel anxiety provoking and uncomfortable in a different way. So you really do need to have some drive and motivation to kind of push through that. But you're right, Trudy, this takes a long time, this stuff. This is really quite intense internal psychological growth. And it does take a lot of courage. Yeah. And I think that how long it takes depends a lot on whether people have had exposure to these ideas of self-reflection before and noticing themselves, because that's just a skill in of itself. Maybe you actually need to learn to do that first. It depends, I guess, on the level of, I guess, unhelpful self-belief that you're dealing with. Unfortunately, some people have kind of had a pretty hard time, other people haven't, and that affects and impacts them in different ways. So, that impacts how long this is all going to take to identify and unpack. And if there is trauma, there may even be a little bit of work that needs to be done with a bit of support there, just to be able to shift some of that stuff if it's a bit more stuck than just a kind of general unhelpful belief about yourself. I also think that it does depend a lot on the supportive network that you have. There's a whole theory called polyvagal theory that's really come about in the last kind of 10 years or so, that talks about this idea that we talk about fight and flight and anxiety. Most people kind of know what that is. Yeah, but we now understand that fight and flight's only part of our picture, right? Fight and flight is when our adrenaline goes off because we think that we're under threat. And I guess in that model, we've always thought that a lack of danger is safety, right? But what we really know, or what the whole polyvagal theory brings to our attention, and so does COVID in a minute when I talk about it, is that, a lack of danger is actually only half the picture. That might be settling our fight and flight down, but true safety as a person is actually social connectedness, is a sense of belonging. Yeah, I mean, historically, in nature, humans have never been the biggest and strongest, predators or whatever, but it was our capacity to work together as a unit, as a team, as a social system, that's allowed us to kind of continue to exist despite not being the biggest and the strongest and so forth. So I think, your support network is actually incredibly important when you're thinking about your ability to do this stuff. Yeah.
I think that's actually really, really critical, because we know, based on, like, I know based on my experience, and my team knows based on experience, that it's a lonely journey, setting up your own business, becoming an online entrepreneur, and basically going down that path, because it separates you from the normal pathway that a lot of society takes. And so a lot of times family and friends don't understand what's going on, what you're trying to do, why you're trying to do it. And oftentimes you'll get the message, well, why don't you just go get a job? And so there's this lack of support that you get from your normal networks that you must absolutely have to replace if you're going to eventually succeed in your business, which is why we run a community, why there's other communities out there that help with that sense of feeling like you belong, that you're doing something with people who are trying to do the same thing as you. You're going to get feedback and all those sorts of things. So that's I knew it was important. I didn't realize how important it was, but that's, it's really, really true what you're saying.
Absolutely. And, there's quite a substantial evidence base for this now, which I think is incredibly important to acknowledge. Yes, absolutely.